Sometimes, the most dangerous hatred doesn't come from your enemies. It comes from the ones who smile when they see you, who say they care, who sit next to you, and quietly resent everything you are. It doesn't scream. It doesn't strike. It festers. It hides behind, "just joking." And, "I didn't mean it that way." It's the kind of hatred that poisons the air without ever raising its voice. Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But what about those who never admit they're irritated? Who never speak what they truly feel? What about the ones who smile with their mouth, but glare with their energy? What if the sharpest knives aren't thrown, but placed gently at your back over time?" This isn't paranoia. This is pattern recognition. And in this episode, we're not chasing drama. We're exploring the subtle, invisible signs that someone close to you may be hiding something far darker than they let on. Not because you're imagining it, but because deep down, you've always felt it. Hatred rarely begins loudly. It begins in the shadows, with envy, with comparison, with a deep discomfort someone feels but never names. Jung believed that what we don't face in ourselves, we project. Not onto strangers, but onto the ones we see most often. The ones who mirror back what we've denied inside. So when someone secretly hates you, especially someone close, a friend, a sibling, a partner, it's often not really you they hate. It's the reflection, the reminder. Your confidence? It makes them question their silence. Your growth? It highlights where they've remained stuck. Your presence? Exposes their insecurity without you saying a word. And so they stay. Close, but not in admiration. In unconscious competition. Not always through sabotage. Sometimes, through micro-withdrawals. A delay in the reply. A cold look that wasn't there before. A celebration you notice they didn't show up for. You feel it. Because the body always knows. Before the mind catches up, your nervous system already feels. This person isn't safe anymore. The tone is off. The praise feels flat. The warmth you once trusted now feels conditional. But here's the danger. When it's someone close, you doubt yourself first. You think, maybe I'm imagining things. Maybe I'm too sensitive. But you're not. You're just conditioned to excuse the pain that comes from people you love. This isn't about blame. It's about awareness. Because hatred doesn't need to shout. Sometimes, it just needs to sit silently beside you, with a smile that hides a bruise. And once you see it, you can stop absorbing it. You stop over-explaining. You stop proving yourself. You stop pouring warmth into a cup that's been cracked by resentment. And when that happens, you reclaim your energy. So let's go deeper. Here are 7 unseen signs that someone close to you may be carrying a hatred they've never said aloud, but that you've always felt. They don't say they're jealous. They'll never admit they feel behind. But every time you grow, they shrink in silence. You share a win, and their smile feels delayed. You speak with pride, and they change the subject. Or worse, they try to one-up you, not with celebration, but with quiet comparison. It's subtle, but unmistakable. Carl Jung wrote that envy is often the shadow of our unlived potential. In other words, the part of them that couldn't starts to hate the part of you that did. When someone close to you harbors hidden envy, your growth doesn't uplift them. It unsettles them. They might say things like, "Must be nice. Not everyone has it that easy. You've changed." But underneath those words is something far deeper. "You left the version of yourself that made me feel safe, and now I don't know where I stand." Your evolution becomes a mirror, not for your success, but for their stagnation, not for your confidence, but for their unresolved insecurity. And what's worse, they may not even realize they're doing it. The unconscious can compete long before the conscious mind admits envy exists. So they try to balance the emotional scales, not by rising, but by pulling you back down. You'll notice, they don't ask about your progress. Or when they do, it sounds performative. They frame your success as luck or privilege. Or they subtly insert their own struggles, as if your light should come with an apology. They're not competing for a prize. They're competing for relevance, for emotional position, for identity. Because if you keep expanding, the version of you they could once contain is gone. And now they're unsure who they are in relation to you. And so the subtle sabotage begins. Passive-aggressive jokes, backhanded compliments, diminishing phrases wrapped in fake concern, advice that sounds supportive, but is actually laced with resistance. Don't forget where you came from. Be careful. Success changes people. You're not the same anymore. And what they really mean is, you're not who I need you to be for my comfort. This is not about cutting people off. It's about recognizing energy dynamics. Because if someone needs you to stay small for them to feel safe, that's not love. That's emotional dependency dressed as loyalty. And here's the deeper truth. Your growth will always reveal who can grow beside you and who can't. Watch how they respond to your self-worth, to your boundaries, to your wins. If every step forward creates tension, if every upgrade triggers a shutdown, if every version of your expansion brings more silence than support, you're not being paranoid. You're feeling resistance that hasn't been spoken, but is being acted out. You'll feel it in the tone. You'll hear it in the humor that feels sharp instead of warm. You'll see it in their presence slowly pulling back, but not disappearing. Just close enough to watch, far enough not to cheer. And here's the most dangerous part. If left unchecked, their silent competition curdles into secret contempt. They begin to expect your failure. They feel relief when you stumble. They find ways to remind you. You're not that special. And the irony? They still say they care. They still call. They still smile. But it's not about love anymore. It's about leverage. They don't want you to collapse. They just want you close enough to never fully rise. You expect closeness and joy. You expect that when you're glowing, they'll glow with you. Because that's what real closeness should feel like, right? Mutual celebration. Shared light. Joy that echoes between hearts. But some people only know how to connect to you through pain. When you struggle, they're there. Present. Available. They listen. They offer advice. They check in. They play the role of supporter perfectly. But then something happens. You heal. You rise. You start choosing peace. You stop complaining. You start celebrating. And their energy shifts. The texts slow down. The check-ins become infrequent. Their voice loses warmth. Their gaze pulls back. Not with cruelty, but with coldness. Carl Jung would say that some people build their identity around being the emotionally stronger one. The rescuer, the guide, the emotionally advanced friend. And when your happiness no longer needs saving, they feel unneeded. You didn't abandon them. You just stopped bleeding. And without your wounds to tend to, they don't know how to stay close. Because your healing forces them to face the part of themselves that hasn't draped. And that's the part they've been avoiding. So they withdraw. Not out of spite, but out of unconscious self-preservation. They don't ask about your new joy. They don't reflect it back. They stop mirroring your excitement. They become quiet. And that quiet is not neutral. It's filled with unsaid tension. Because your joy doesn't echo theirs. It exposes their stagnation. They feel the emotional gap between where you are and where they've stayed. And instead of being inspired, they feel irrelevant. Because if you're no longer the struggling friend, who are they in the dynamic? They retreat. Emotionally, energetically, sometimes physically. You feel the disconnection. You hear it in their tone. You sense it in the spaces they don't fill anymore. And you start questioning yourself. Did I do something wrong? Am I too proud now? Did I change too much? But the truth is, you did nothing wrong. You just got better. You found peace. And your peace highlighted their war. This isn't about blaming them. It's about understanding the psychic mechanism at play. Because some people don't know how to love you unless you're broken. They don't know how to stand beside someone who no longer needs fixing. They only know intimacy through pain. And when that pain disappears, they disappear too. This doesn't mean they're evil. It means they're unconscious. Still relating from their wounds. Still needing to feel needed, to feel worthy. But that's not your responsibility. Your light isn't a threat. Your joy isn't arrogance. Your growth isn't abandonment. It's the natural consequence of healing. And when someone quietly resents your peace, they weren't in love with you. They were attached to who you were before you found yourself. So don't shrink your joy. Don't dim your light. Don't start suffering again just to be relatable. Because the right people will not only sit in your darkness, they will celebrate when you step into the sun. It doesn't sound like an insult. It sounds like care, support, advice. But if you listen closely, you'll feel it. It stings a little too much to be love. It's too passive to be honest. Too soft to be called an attack. But too consistent to be accidental. I'm just worried you're moving too fast. Are you sure that's the right decision? I just don't want to see you make a mistake again. It's wrapped in kindness, packaged as protection. But it's not protection. It's power. On the surface, it's concern. But underneath, it's subtle control, disguised judgment, unspoken resentment. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to be socially acceptable. And sometimes, that mask isn't a smile. It's, I'm just worried about you. But beneath that carefully constructed concern hides a shadow that cannot celebrate your change. A part of them that is threatened by your risk-taking, your confidence, your independence. They won't criticize you directly. That would make them the bad guy. Instead, they plant doubt. They offer unsolicited advice. Not to guide, but to destabilize. Their words are soft. Their tone is calm. But you walk away, feeling smaller than before. And that's not an accident. That's emotional erosion. Little by little, you start questioning the things you once knew in your bones. You delay decisions. You shrink your plans. You rehearse your words carefully around them, just to avoid another loving doubt. And the worst part? You feel guilty for even suspecting it, because they say all the right things. They smile. They hug. But you don't feel safe. You feel judged, even when no one says the word. That's not your imagination. That's your intuition picking up on something your logic can't explain yet. Because true concern empowers. It doesn't diminish. It affirms your autonomy. It offers support without strings. It holds space without making you feel small. But this kind of concern, it's love with conditions. It says, I'll support you, as long as your choices don't threaten my comfort. I'll love you, as long as you remain someone I can quietly manage. And if you change, if you grow, if you stop needing approval, they'll call it distance. They'll say you're pulling away. But really, you're just leaving their control. This is manipulation in sheep's clothing. Not overt, not aggressive, but deeply psychological. It makes you second-guess yourself, then feel guilty for second-guessing them. And that's the trap. If someone's concern always feels like a weight, not a lift, pay attention. Because not all love empowers. Some love is disguised insecurity. Some support is quiet sabotage. And when hatred hides, it rarely shouts. It whispers, with sweet words, gentle tones, soft hands. But the wound it leaves is real. Boundaries are sacred. They're not walls. They're doors with handles only on your side. They exist to protect your peace, to honor your values, to hold space for your growth. But to someone who secretly resents you, your boundaries feel like rejection. They won't confront them directly. They won't say, your healing makes me uncomfortable. Instead, they'll joke, oh, I guess you're too busy for me now. Someone's got a lot of rules these days. You used to be more fun. You've changed. And they'll say it with a laugh. But the laugh carries shadow, as if your self-respect is something to be mocked. As if your personal growth is a punchline. Carl Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And that's what's happening here. Mockery becomes a mask, a shield for their discomfort. Because your clarity reflects their confusion. You used to say yes without thinking. You used to tolerate their teasing. You used to be easy. Now, you pause. You say no. You don't apologize for needing space. And suddenly, you're too much. But here's the truth. You're not too much, you're just no longer shrinking. So instead of honoring your limits, They test them. They forget your boundaries. They tease your rituals. They override your no with playful guilt. Tripping. I was just joking. Don't be so sensitive. You know I didn't mean it like that. But they did. They meant to make you question yourself. Because real support respects boundaries. It doesn't test them. It doesn't twist them into shame. This isn't about conflict. It's about control. They can't control who you're becoming. So they try to mock you back into who you used to be. The version of you that kept quiet. That said yes. That allowed discomfort just to keep the peace. But peace without boundaries isn't peace. It's performance. And when someone mocks what matters to you, they're not defending the relationship. They're defending their comfort zone. Because your evolution challenges their emotional laziness. Your growth demands they look at themselves. And many won't. So instead of rising with you, they resist you. Not through distance, but through mockery. And that mockery starts to wear on you. You begin to question your voice. You shrink your needs. You explain your boundaries more than you enforce them. But here's what Jung would say. What you resist persists. And what they're resisting is the truth that you're becoming more whole, more honest, more free. And that version of you no longer fits their narrative. So they label you dramatic, too sensitive, unreasonable. Not because you are, but because they can no longer dominate you emotionally. And that feels threatening to someone who once felt superior. So how do you know the difference between harmless teasing and quiet contempt? Pay attention to how you feel after the laugh. Do you feel closer? Or do you feel smaller? Do you feel understood? Or do you feel doubted? Because real love can joke with you, but never at the expense of your dignity. And if someone consistently treats your boundaries as optional, as dramatic, as laughable, they're not mocking you. They're mocking the part of you that finally learned to choose yourself. That's not your fault, but it is your signal. They say the right things. They nod. They smile. They clap when you share a new idea. But something in you knows. It's hollow. Because when it's time to show up, they vanish. They forget. They're busy. Or worse, they say, I didn't think it was that serious. And you pause. You replay the conversation in your mind. You remember the excitement in their tone, the warmth in their voice, but it never made it to action. This isn't just forgetfulness. This is passive sabotage. Carl Jung believed that unconscious resentment often shows up in behavior long before it shows up in words. So when someone acts supportive, but never follows through, they're not really being supportive. They're maintaining an image. They want to be seen as the good friend, the loyal partner, the reliable sibling. But they can't stomach your success, because your success triggers their shadow. So they keep saying, you've got this, while disappearing the moment this arrives. They want proximity, but not alignment. They want credit for being there, without the responsibility of actually caring. They clap in public, but go quiet in private. They give empty encouragement, but don't respond when you win. And when you finally call it out, they make it about you. I didn't know it mattered so much. You're overthinking it. You're too sensitive. But you're not. You're not being sensitive. You're being honest. Because love isn't in the words. It's in the follow-through. In the showing up. In the consistency between words and energy. Anyone can say, I support you. But real support shows up on the hard days. On the launch days. On the milestone moments. Fake support lives in potential. Real support lives in presence. They nod, but don't ask questions. They smile, but don't participate. They agree, but quietly disengage. And slowly, you start to feel crazy, because they never said anything wrong, but everything feels off. You wonder, am I asking too much? Shouldn't I just be grateful they even listen? But listening without showing up is not love. It's emotional self-preservation. Because showing up for someone who's growing requires you to deal with your own shadow. And many aren't ready for that. So instead, they perform the idea of support. Just enough to be seen. Never enough to truly be felt. And here's the real harm. It makes you doubt your own reality. Because they sound supportive. They act kind. But you feel alone. Even in their presence. That's not emotional safety. That's performed proximity. And if you bring it up, they guilt you. Or deflect. Or say you're projecting. But you're not. You're reading the energy accurately. So don't gaslight yourself just to maintain harmony. Don't accept halfway love because it's dressed in politeness. If someone constantly offers verbal support, but disappears when it counts, don't fall for the script. They're not supporting you. They're performing the role of supporter, to stay close, without being real. And real connection doesn't need a role. It just needs truth. Have you ever noticed? They're most attentive. When you're struggling, when you're sad, lost, uncertain, they're suddenly available. They call. They check in. They ask questions. They say all the right things. But the moment you start rising, they fade. They cancel. They forget. They go silent. And you're left wondering, was that ever real? Because this isn't love. This isn't care. This is emotional control. Carl Jung taught that the shadow often hides in our unconscious need to feel powerful, around those who feel powerless. And some people, they don't love you. They love feeling stronger than you. When you're in pain, they're the healer, the guide, the wise one. But when you start healing, when you stop depending, when you begin to stand on your own, they don't know who to be anymore. Because their identity, whether they know it or not, is built on your need for them. They never say they want you to stay broken. But deep down, they need you a little broken. Because your struggle makes them relevant. Your pain gives them purpose. Your dependence secures their place. So they subtly resist your recovery. They become less available, less enthusiastic, less present. You'll notice it like this. They listen more when you're in pain, but seem distracted when you're proud. They comfort you when you doubt, but stay quiet when you shine. They know how to hold space for your tears, but they can't seem to hold space for your joy. And the worst part? They'll say, I'm always here for you. Yes, but only when you're hurting. When you're winning, growing, claiming your worth, they vanish, because your strength exposes their shadow. Your joy reminds them of their stuckness. Your growth challenges their illusion of superiority. And so they say less. Do less. Disappear just enough for you to feel it, but not enough to be blamed for it. They want to be the one you run to, not the one who walks beside you, because they can't compete with your confidence. They can't mirror your light. They only know how to love you through your wounds. And the moment you start healing, they feel powerless. They may not even be aware of this. But unconscious patterns don't need awareness to cause harm. They just need access. And if you keep giving access to someone who only shows up when you're weak, you'll start dimming your light, just to feel connected again. You'll unconsciously start bringing your pain to them, because that's when they come close. That's when they listen. That's when they stay. But that's not love. That's feeding off your vulnerability. Love doesn't just hold you when you're hurting. It celebrates you when you rise. It doesn't disappear when you grow. It adapts. It expands. So if someone only appears during your breakdowns, but never during your breakthroughs, they're not a support system. They're an emotional power play. And that's not compassion. That's covert control. You laugh, and they go quiet. You celebrate something small, and they change the subject. You speak with light in your voice, and they bring up something heavy. Not because they want to keep you grounded. Not because they care about balance. But because your joy makes them uncomfortable. Carl Jung said, what we reject in ourselves, we cannot tolerate in others. And for some people, that rejection is joy. They've learned to survive, not to celebrate. They've adapted to disappointment. They've built emotional armor around sorrow. So when they see your lightness, it triggers their wounds. They don't say it out loud. They rarely look angry. But the signs are there. They avoid eye contact when you're happy. They change the topic when you speak with enthusiasm. They say things like, you're too excited. Don't get your hopes up. Let's be realistic. But what they really mean is, I don't know how to feel what you're feeling. And instead of admitting that, they deflect. They mute. They shame. Not directly, but enough for you to feel it. And the worst part? You start to shrink your joy, just to stay connected. You dial down your voice. You soften your smile. You make your victories sound smaller, just to avoid that look in their eyes. The look that says, "You're becoming someone I don't know how to be around." And the more you grow into your joy, the more they subtly pull away. They'll call it honesty. They'll call it realism. But what it really is a response to their own untouched shadow. Because joy is more than a feeling. It's a psychological threat to those who have never allowed themselves to feel it. To them, joy feels unstable, irresponsible, even dangerous, because it reminds them of how long they've been surviving without it. So instead of letting it in, they shut it down in others. Not to hurt you, but to protect themselves from a part of them they've exiled. You'll notice it in small ways. They downplay your excitement. They change the mood when things feel too light. They anchor joy with fear. Be careful. Don't get ahead of yourself. Things don't stay good for long. And you start wondering, is it me? Am I being dramatic? Am I too sensitive? You're not being dramatic. You're just learning to feel again. And some people don't know how to witness that. Because if your joy is real, it means their numbness isn't necessary. And that's terrifying to someone who built an identity around enduring life, not enjoying it. But your joy is not the problem. Their unprocessed pain is. So don't shrink. Don't dim. Don't apologize for smiling too wide. Don't hold back your light just to make someone else feel better in the dark. Because if someone needs you to stay small, in order to stay close, they're not celebrating you. They're tolerating you. And your joy deserves more than tolerance. It deserves to be witnessed, to be reflected, to be met. By people who've done the inner work to feel fully, not just survive silent. Not all hatred screams. Some smiles. Some hugs you when others are watching. Some remembers your birthday, but forgets your boundaries. Some hatred doesn't hate you for who you are, but for who you're becoming. And that's why it stays close. To monitor, to measure, to slowly wear you down, without ever getting caught. Carl Jung believed that true awareness requires bravery, not just to see what's wrong in others, but to look inward, to see where we've tolerated energy that no longer matches our wholeness. Sometimes we stay too long, not because we don't know the truth, but because we fear the silence that comes after it. We say, "I've known them forever. They've always been like this. They mean well." But underneath that logic is a soul whispering, "I'm tired of shrinking." So here's your reminder. If being alone means protecting your peace, your clarity, your joy, then be alone. Let the distance form. Let the silence come. Let those who secretly resent you exclude themselves. Because love without respect is not love. Support without consistency is not support. Closeness without safety is not connection. Your energy is not for negotiation. Your light is not up for debate. And your boundaries are not a betrayal. They are the birth of your self-respect. So to those who only loved the broken version of you, let them mourn. You're not here to be digestible. You're not here to be agreeable. You're here to be whole. And wholeness isn't loud. It's not vengeful. It's quiet, unmoving, unapologetic. You don't need to explain your healing. You don't need to convince them to understand. You just need to keep growing. Because sometimes, the final act of love is letting go without a fight. No closing arguments. No dramatic exits. Just silence. And self-trust. If someone needed you small to stay close, they never deserve to stand next to your power. And if your light makes you harder to be around, maybe you were never meant to be surrounded. Maybe you were meant to be sovereign. Rooted. Peaceful. So protect your joy. Guard your peace. And walk away from anyone who mistakes your growth for a threat. Because one day, someone will witness your light and not flinch. They'll clap when you rise. They'll stand beside your boundaries, not behind them waiting for you to bend. Until then, let yourself be free.